When is the best time to end a story? That's a question basically every writer has to ask themselves at one point or another. It's sort of inevitable. And honestly, if you're asking me, a lot of the time, they kind of suck at giving an answer. I mean, like, obviously there's stuff that doesn't technically need to end, like The Simpsons, where they can just keep on chugging along until the end of time, or I guess until Julie Kavanaugh's voice gives, which I'm kind of shocked it hasn't already. But the point is, most things that have a start are meant to end. But not every story knows where that end point should be, since the author either hasn't planned it, or got distracted, or doesn't think the plan they do have is good enough, or they might just love their world and characters too much to ever want to let them go. And that's understandable. It's a hard thing leaving your creation behind after what could be years of work you've spent on perfecting it, but that's exactly why you should choose to end things at the right time. Since, like I said, not every author plans out the end of their story, hell, some of them even choose not to, and it usually reads like it too, but deep down I feel like they always know when it needs to happen. It's just that some of them can't say goodbye, so instead they keep running it into the ground until it's been 20 fucking years and Cyberchase still hasn't saved Motherboard from hackers. That's why I really appreciate stories that don't overstay their welcome and know just how long they need to last. Avatar, Gravity Falls, Over the Garden Wall, all things that were more than big enough to keep going if they wanted to, but didn't since they knew the stories would be better for it. But let me ask you this. What if they didn't do that? What if instead of Avatar ending with the Fire Nation reformed and a new peace being reached across the nations, blah 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 blah, it turns out Sozin's Comet 2 was coming around. So now Aang's gotta learn everything all over again, even though we literally just got done watching that. Wouldn't that suck? Well, that's what I like to call the Boruto effect. Now, it's not something you see often, mostly because the people involved tend to have a little more self-respect than that, a little artistic integrity. But listen, sometimes you gotta stick to your guns and end a story right where you think it should, and sometimes there's a big sack of money with a dollar sign on it being waved at you, so move out of the way, bitch! Fuller House ain't gonna make it so! And that's the feeling you always get with these types of sections. They never feel like they're intended, they just kinda happen because the thing's really big. And for whatever reason, the author just doesn't have any other options for making rent. Usually it happens a couple of years after the story just like definitively stopped at the point it felt it should. It's got that type of conclusion that just feels like the end, but then you'll see an announcement like, hey, guess what, it's back, you wanted it back, didn't you? And I mean, I guess I did, but also, what's left to see? And the answer to that normally is nothing, because it ended. There wasn't supposed to be anything else. So when you artificially extend it to just keep on going anyway, all some people can do with that premise is repeat shit. And that's why most of the time I can't quite find the spark in me to get really genuinely angry about it, cause like, what do you expect? It's Boruto. Were you expecting something substantial from Boruto? No, actually, let me rephrase that. Were you expecting something from Boruto, or Toy Story 4, or pretty much any of the Fantastic Beasts movies? Like, I'm just saying, it gets to a point, doesn't it? There's gotta be a point where you realize it's not worth getting mad over. But then I think of what happened to I Hate Fairyland and remember I'm a dirty hypocrite because what the actual fuck? Oh, hey, by the way, this video is sponsored by GamerStuff. Not gonna waste time with a long ad, just know it's an energy drink powder, low calorie, loads of servings, fun flavors. I like it. You can get 10% off a purchase or just some free samples if you put just those in your cart with my code, JustStop. And that's it. Alright, you probably don't know what I'm referring to, so just to clarify in case you're out of the know, which you probably are, I Hate Fairyland was this initially short-lived comic series about a little girl named Gertrude who gets transported to a fantasy world called Fairyland for what should be a day-long adventure. Only one problem though, it turns out she's extremely terrible at it, so she ends up spending almost 30 years in there trying to find the key to her exit while never growing or looking any different. Of course, after a while she gets real crazy and cynical about it from being so fed up with the place and its magical rulers not giving a shit, so the series is pretty much about her bumbling her way across the place in a flurry of hyper-violence and sarcasm, trying to find her way out. And for what it was actually pretty great. I know the idea sounds kinda overdone in a world where isekai and its parodies are just so insanely popular now thanks to anime, but back in 2015, there wasn't a lot of stuff out there exactly like this, and even if you do want to compare it to those, it still stands out thanks to it having such specific influences. The guy who made it, Scotty Young, was a big fan of Mad Magazine and old Image comics, and you can really feel that in the dialogue, the art style, the references. It's a really well-defined series as far as what inspired it, and unlike a lot of parodies where the references are basically all it has, another thing Fairyland did that made it special was the fact it actually had a real narrative. It's a very loose narrative that mainly boils down to just character tries to get home despite herself, but it stayed fresh by still treating itself with an air of sincerity. So yeah, there's stuff like a David Bowie Labyrinth parody, complete with Magic Bulge, and other subversions of writing tropes you see in fantasy, but it also had arcs, twists, progression, depth, and characters who weren't nearly as one-dimensional as you'd probably think. Like, going off my description of her, Gert kinda sounds like she'd have the personality of a Reddit mod or a serial killer, but even though she is just constantly on the verge of a mental breakdown, I mean, she bites the head off some mushroom guys issue 1, and her burnt-out magic guide Larry is so used to this he can just predict it, but the more we see of her, the more we notice she's not just crazy, she's frustrated. And there's a logic to her frustration that comes from being forcefully trapped in some place she doesn't want to be for most of her life. You know, it's obvious she's in the wrong for killing by the dozen when she assumes she needs to, but the only reason she ever acts that way in the first place is from getting so fed up with this magical prison world that she snaps. So she kills the narrator, ruining her quiet, and the jerks that give her impossible riddles, and the queen who only keeps her there since she's more inclined to follow the rules and kill her than show an ounce of kindness and just let her go. See, Gert might be a monster, but the truth is, she didn't ask to be. And that goes a long way in helping you not only sympathize with her, but also realize that Fairyland is kinda bullshit. Sure, on the surface, it's your typical beautifully designed fantasy world any kid would love to be in, but Gert's mere existence is pretty much the prime example of everything that's wrong with it. The forced whimsy, the arbitrary rules, the unfair technicalities, even the black and white logic that paints Gert as pure evil when it's guys like this clockhead bitch who made it happen by facilitating it. There's nothing special about the clockhead, by the way, I just wanted to mention them. But yeah, Gert's just playing by the rules of a game she was never allowed to control. So when after 20 issues of trying, she finally makes it home, it feels pretty good knowing she stuck it to those assholes once and for all. But what makes it even better for me is the epilogue, where we see that Gert's an adult in an office, she's living a boring, mediocre life, but when she gets the thought for a second of trying to find a way back to Fairyland to escape it, after 30 years of using censored curses in place of real ones, she ends it all with 2 words. Fuck Fairyland. Now that, to me, is a perfect ending. Since it's not just the best way to end a joke you didn't even know it had been setting up from day one with its alternate title, but it tells you that even if Gert's human life hasn't turned out the way she hoped it would, she'll still take it over Fairyland. And what better way could there be for her to say as much than by using her freedom to do what she never could before? Tell the place to go fuck itself. It's so beautiful. And for a good 5 years, that was the end. 2 years of publication, 20 issues, 4 volumes, not too long, not too short, just the right length to do what it wanted and be a funny, smart, subversive, violent, surprisingly poignant little series. And you see, this is the part where I hang myself. Okay, to be fair to Scotty Young here, he did always say he might come back to the thing if he had new ideas, but that was in the context of, like, Tales from the Borderlands style stories, stuff that either happened in between issues or following other characters from the world. And we got that. It's called The Untold Stories of Fairyland. So far as I'm concerned, we never should have been worried about this happening. I mean, there's even a mini storyline in this collection about making fun of that idea. So you'd think we'd have been saved from this, but you'd be fucking wrong. So now you're probably wondering, what's the deal with this? Why do I hate it so much? Like, yeah, the original ending was great, and it's kind of a bummer to see it ruined for the sake of some cheap continuation, but like I said earlier, what did I expect? The game was rigged from the start. It's Boruto Fairyland. What's the point in getting mad at something I knew was doomed from the beginning? Oh, you don't even realize how many layers there is to that question, because it's not even a matter of it doing just one thing to piss me off. That'd be simple. Now, it's more like it found a reason to piss me off, and then it didn't think that was a good enough reason, so it tried to find a better one. And then it did it again, and again, and again, and again. And for the record, that wasn't comedic exaggeration there. I actually counted the number of times I think it went another step above the last level of you cannot be fucking serious. I am being so upfront with you right now when I say this shit gets so bad that after a while, I actually convinced myself that it has to be on purpose, since Fairyland was a very self-aware series. It was the kind of thing that would intentionally make you think it was going in one direction just to skip over it between issues, or cut it off before it could start. You know, it was very open about the fact it didn't want to come off as, well, cliche. So in reading this sequel, it doesn't just feel like it doesn't care like one of these things typically should. It feels like it was actively made to spite the fans for buying it. Like, hey asshole, you should have known when this is over. So if you're part of the group that wasn't satisfied with that and just needed this to happen, then fine. Let's see how much you can take. You want more Fairyland? You got it, bitch. I dare you to stop reading. And look, obviously, I don't know if that's true or not. It's just a personal theory. But honestly, I kind of hope it is the case, just because otherwise it means the thing's lost the plot so bad it can't even see its own reflection anymore. And I've got reason to think it's on purpose, since first of all, the start of this thing isn't that bad. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's good, but I could at least see the makings of something fun in this reading the first 2 issues. Basically, the way it's set up is that Gert's not doing too well in life from spending so much time in Fairyland, which I don't know how to feel about. I guess I kind of assumed her going home allowed her to actually go through life, and we were just seeing the end point of that in the comics epilogue, but nope, apparently she just kind of plopped out as a fully grown woman. We don't know what happened to her family or anything, since it's not too concerned with that. It just lets us know that Gert's life sucks. She's constantly bouncing from job to job, no one believes her about Fairyland. It's about what you'd expect if she was just thrown into being an adult woman, which, hey, that could have been interesting by itself, sort of like Isekai OG-san about this guy who lived in another world for years and has no idea how to adjust, but again, no, that's not familiar enough. We gotta bring it back. And to give the thing some credit here, trust me, it's not gonna be lasting long, they do come up with a pretty creative idea for bringing her back by having it so this tech bro billionaire guy loses his son there and wants to get him back, plus take over the place to make it a theme park. But only someone who's already been invited to Fairyland can go back there, so Gert pretty much agrees with the condition that she'll get half, and I like this idea. Sure, they had to skip loads of other cool ideas to get here, but Gert wanting to take back control of her life by making what used to be her prison a playground instead of facing reality, that's a fun concept. I can see it being used to tell a different story about revisiting trauma and the ways victims try to cope with it. There's a lot of potential in this setup, but by issue 3, it's already starting to fall apart. And at first, it's kind of subtle stuff, like, oh right, Gert doesn't have a partner right now since Larry stayed in Fairyland. Here, let's give her these two guys that are so clearly just Diet Larry, she's able to kick one away for a joke in issue 5 and never see him again. And it's issue 5 where the problems really start getting big, since up to that issue, it has just been a little disappointing. An overly long Gremlins parody, an issue where Gert's implied to bang a guy made of guts she built while trapped in a fish, nothing too insane, just sort of meandering stuff that feels like it's trying to capture the first run with its parodies and wackiness, but lacks the fast pace or chemistry that had to make it work. With the end of issue 5 though, that's where it really starts going to shit, since not only has it already taken us 5 full issues to get to Fairyland, something the first run probably would have done way faster, but once we do finally get there, the first thing we learn is that the tech bro's kid already made it home and he's given up on his theme park idea. So now Gert is just stuck in Fairyland with no motivation other than getting out. Again. And this is the first part where I really started side-eyeing the thing. Since there was some iffiness beforehand, I kind of shrugged off as it trying new things with an adult Gert, but just straight up abandoning your premise to get back to the status quo, even if it's slightly altered, that pisses me off. It feels like a cheap way of hooking your audience with something new, only to go back on that as soon as possible. But I didn't know just how deep the cheap hole was gonna go. Okay, so at this point I'm thinking, alright, yeah, this is Boruto. Any arc Gert might have had just got thrown out the window, the depth is gone, might as well stop having expectations. But just as I was coming to accept that and thought about moving on, since I figured there's nothing left here to care about, I got to issue 7. An issue where, in keeping with the nostalgic repetition, it brings back a bunch of old Gert variants to fight the main one. It's a pretty standard idea you've probably seen before on TV, but then something happens that pretty much anyone who was still reading this at the time will tell you was fucking insane. The variant of Gert that's still a kid kills adult Gert. And then she takes her place, doing the same thing of trying to get a way out, and everyone just kinda accepts that. Yep, this is Gert now. The one you followed for the last 27 issues, she's gone. Just like that. No send-off, no big gesture. She doesn't even get a good fight with the young one. She just says, you're old. Adult Gert's like, nuh-uh, and swings her axe. Young Gert dodges and swings hers. And next page, adult Gert is dead. That's her legacy. Like, remember when after Endgame for the next Guardians of the Galaxy movie, they had to make it a big deal that this new Gamora is essentially a different person so they can't go on like nothing changed and she leaves the group? Imagine if that didn't happen. Imagine if, after following her for multiple movies, and Gamora died in the events of Infinity War, she comes back as her younger self in Endgame, and everyone's just like, oh, okay, guess that's Gamora now. Well, actually, I am not the Gamora that you know. Shh, you're Gamora now. Anyway, moving on, and they just went into Guardians 3 like it was no big deal. That's this decision. And it happens so quickly after she gets back to Fairyland, too. There's literally only a single full issue where she's in Fairyland as the main character. Like, oh, you thought us abandoning the setup was a status quo reset? Baby, you haven't seen nothing yet. We're going back to young Gert. What's that you said about progress, investment, naturally caring about someone who's the main character when you essentially replace them? Damn, that's crazy. It's almost like the main characters matter or something. So you know where this was now on the pointless sequels totem? Because we've gone far past Boruto status. Yeah, now we're at fucking Dragon Ball GT. The type of series where they just drop the pretenses to say they don't give a shit. The main series happened, so let's just go back to random young Goku adventures, since you liked young Goku, didn't ya? In fact, it's almost too perfect a comparison. And this goes back to my theory about it being an intentional fuck job, because back in that one spin-off thing I mentioned that made fun of the series still going on, it predicts, or, well, I guess it's more accurate to say it foreshadows Gert coming back to Fairyland as a kid. But at that time, it was a joke. About like, wow, could you imagine? How stupid is that? So that means Scotty Young was making fun of these concepts a while before straight up doing them in the sequel. And judging by the anime/Street Fighter parody from the original run, he probably knows a thing or two about the stuff. So what are the chances he might have intentionally modeled some of these decisions after those hated sequels, I mean, from here, they bring back an old villain with Queen Claudia, just like GT does Android 17. Then it has a bunch of completely unrelated issues that have nothing to do with anything, like a straight retelling of Billy Goat Gruff, where Gert just shows up at the end, or a movie studio making a shitty version of Gert's story, just like the completely meaningless episodes of GT. You know, why does Gert just randomly decide to stop pursuing her main goal of looking for a way home to mess around? Because GT did that. But maybe you're still not convinced. Maybe you're still holding on to this crazy idea that an author wouldn't sabotage their own series out of spite for the fans who wouldn't let him end it, making a sequel that gradually got worse just to test their tolerance. Maybe you're still blind like that. And I get it. I was reluctant to think that way too. But that's when I got to what's considered the only big 5-part event of the series. What makes it any different from the other 5-issue arcs that have come so far? Well, it's an event. It's gonna be epic. There's even a note on the issue before it saying how awesome it's gonna be, and this series has never led us astray before, so I was hyped. Okay, no, I wasn't. I'd actually dropped the series back at about issue 10 initially and didn't come back to it again until recently, but shit, if they're hyping it up this much, it's gotta be good. And for a second, when I was reading the end of issue 16, I started getting a little intrigued, because after New Gert does about the most ungert thing ever and says she was never actually mad at Fairyland, she was just mad at herself, and she's glad to call Fairyland her home, just stomping the whole point of the first run into the ground as hard as possible. We cut to Hell and hear that someone is leading all the people Gert's killed over the years, the old Gert, not the new one, though they pretty much treat it like this is interchangeable, to destroy Fairyland and take her down for good. And I thought, oh shit! Has this all been getting worse and worse and more uncharacteristically like itself so old Gert can see it happening, make up with her old enemies, and take down this imposter after it does the ultimate middle finger to her character? Are we gonna see her glorious return? Nah, it's Happy. You know, I made this news for a joke, but it's looking like a really good option right now. Alright, so Happy was a character from the very early days of the comic. She was essentially the first ongoing threat Gert had to deal with in the form of this ungodly, perfect ray of sunshine that Claudia brought in to get the key and go home before Gert, so she'd be a resident instead of a guest, and Claudia could finally kill her. So she was this funny little character that did her job as a threat while being incredibly innocent, and the ending joke with her is that after Gert gets this massive fuck you power boost, she's able to kill off Happy like it's no big deal. And in the original run, that bit in issue 5 was the last time we ever saw her. Except for the start of issue 16, where after Gert dies and goes to Hell briefly, it looks like Happy is the one running it. But she's not. That was just a cheap trick by the devil to try and torment her with what looked like the return of a character from her past. And they even go into a conversation afterwards about how it's a cheap narrative trick for the sake of a twist when Gert really had no emotional connection to her. And after that, they hammer this point home even further by going through all the people she's killed and how little any of them mean to her. So in the issue this new run shares a number with, it's all about making fun of the idea of returning villains and how little relevance it has in the context of this story since Gert doesn't give a shit about any of them. And in this issue, this storyline in the new run is just them doing that. You still think my theory about this is implausible? Oh yeah, you probably thought I was messing around and didn't mean it. Oh, what a funny joke. But buddy, I am all in on this theory. Since there's no other explanation for this, it's literally everything the first run made fun of. The cheap twist, the lack of meaning, the exact same character being used for it. And that's not even going into how, presumably because Scotty just forgot, I guess, this canonizes that Happy now legitimately lives in hell here, despite the fact that doesn't make any sense. Happy was a good person. That was literally her whole thing. Why would she go to hell? I mean, they do try to wave away how she and her army can get back to Fairyland by saying hell is just another layer of it, which might imply that everyone goes there, even though in the first run it's clearly the biblical hell being run by the actual devils, so But still, just the idea of this is so unbelievably dumb that I seriously thought there was no possible way it could get any dumber. I long for those days. But wait, seeing as this is supposed to be everyone Gert's ever killed, why isn't adult Gert in this group? Well, it turns out she actually is. I just didn't notice on my first read-through since she's sort of just integrated into the other Gert variants and never gets properly acknowledged as being the main character we used to follow. She's just part of the background now as Happy leads this charge up to Fairyland. And I know I made a point about it earlier, but for real, what series do you know where the main lead gets killed by their younger self, comes back into the narrative as a fucking extra, and then never does anything for the rest of the story? I'm about to get into the battle itself because it's so stupid, but spoiler alert, she lives, so where does she go? Does her story just not matter now that young Gert wrestled the spotlight from her? Maybe it's for the best. After all, her adventures could never be as fascinating as young Gert, who, in an attempt to save Fairyland, since reminder, she considers it her home now for dumb bullshit reasons, goes to well-known fictional characters to get them to help her fight. Except actually, no, she doesn't do that. She goes to one, Dorothy, from The Wizard of Oz. And this is where the whole thing just gets weird, since they spend a shockingly long amount of time on Dorothy's thoughts after Gert leaves. We get to see her contemplate whether it's worth fighting for now that she has a girlfriend with the most stereotypical lesbian haircut ever. When she decides to join in and gets other characters to help, there's a scene of her looking over trophies from her adventures. It's just so bafflingly serious and melodramatic for a public domain character that only just got introduced to the narrative. But it all made a lot more sense to me when I looked into Scotty Young's history and found out that he did the graphic novel versions of the first 6 Wizard of Oz books. So do you understand what that means? He inserted his fucking Wizard of Oz fanfiction into his otherwise completely unrelated series. What? What? How did... What? And that's not even the most confusing part, since after they decide to help Gert out during the fight, it leads to her main partner not being Larry, or I don't know, somebody else you'd expect to be alongside her in her greatest fight ever, but Dorothy. Dorothy Gale tag teams with Gert against Happy after being introduced 2 goddamn issues before. Like, I'm sorry, but this is worse than fanfiction. I don't think you could come up with a more, type of climax if you tried. This is madness. It doesn't sound possible. And yet, at the same time, the way the fight ends is with the most generic, boring type of conclusion you've ever seen. How generic are we talking? There's literally a TV tropes page describing this cliche, and somehow, it hits all of them. Gert yells for them to stop fighting. She talks about how Happy only became this way because of her, and it's her fault, so the blame should go to her, and you should just kill her instead. And then I shit you not, a new rule opens up in the Fairyland handbook for Gert's selfless act, and it generates a new key she can use to get home. But only after she finds it, which makes her go into a rage that sets her back to how she was before she blamed herself for everything, somehow continuing the story even longer. This is real. This is how the arc concludes, and it just keeps going. It just keeps going on somehow with these one-off issues that have nothing to do with literally anything. There's no story anymore. There's no continuity, arcs, progression. It's just this flanderized version of Gert and Larry doing random shit each chapter in whatever random scenario Scotty Young can think of. In the newest issue, as I'm writing this, they just have an adventure with Popeye, since he's in the public domain now. What the fuck is this series anymore? Did they just run out of ways to top themselves in terms of badness? Have we finally reached the ceiling of a home in China from lowering the bar so much? I'm genuinely asking. And I'm not sure if I want to know the answer. Like, this would normally be the point where I come up with some kind of absurd joke as a premise pitch, but the series is already there. I can't come up with something stupider than this, can you? Fuck! I don't know what direction this comic's gonna take next, and when I say that, I really do mean I have no idea, and neither do you, but I really can't tell you just how much it makes me depressed that this is considered a part of the main run. I mean, it just takes everything good about what the original did and either makes it worse, does the opposite, or outright destroys its old legacy so it can return to the status quo over and over. By now, it's reached an era where nothing seems to matter, and that hurts when I think about how much the old run tried to avoid that. It was inventive in its weirdness. Plot points actually mattered, things connected, and came back into play when they felt like they should've. I won't try to pretend that it's a high art masterpiece or anything. At times it could even be really messy, but I was always engaged with it since it was charming and interesting and funny, and it had an idea of where it was going. You know, I've had a lot of things to say about this sequel as a whole, but ultimately the worst part about it to me is just how pointless it's gotten, even within its own new continuity. Like, say what you will about Boruto or GT, God knows I have, at least they try to progress in their own narratives. At least they try to build shit that possibly someone could come to care about, but there's no reason to care about I Hate Fairyland anymore, since everything just resets itself over again by the end for the sake of brand recognition. It doesn't matter what happens next issue, it's all gonna lead back to the same exact place. Gert will never grow again, she will never have an interesting relationship with any other character, and Gert will never get home. Because in the words of a prophet named Timmy Turner, the reason they couldn't build a boat on Gilligan's Island is because it would end the series. So the torment will never end. And personally, I'm not sticking around to support this thing hurting itself any longer. So peace out, I Hate Fairyland. We'll always have those first 20 issues. But please fuck off now. I've been Just Stop. Thanks for watching. Code Just Stop, 10% off on Gamer Subs if you want to check that out. See ya.